Hello and welcome to our Knights of the Roundtable Service Catalog Series webinar. My name is Tabitha Ishman and I'm the Marketing Manager of Excalibur Data Systems. This mini-series is everything that you need to know about the Service Catalog. So for today's session, session 1, we will be focused on building the Service Catalog, while the next session will be focused on the evolution of the Service Catalog. And emails for the next 2 sessions will be sent out later this week. One of our customers today will engage and speak about their service catalog while explaining their wins and challenges with the process. This will be an interactive webinar, which will allow you to ask questions and share ideas, so don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat window at any time. Excalibur Data Systems is excited to welcome you into our customer Cherwell community and to create an atmosphere of engagement. For the past 21 years, Excalibur Data Systems has provided a high level of service that has allowed our clients to achieve success through the strategic use of information technology solutions that solve business problems. As a boutique integrator specializing in ITIL-based ITSM and ESM platforms, Excalibur has seen success in working with clients to identify enabling technology that fits their business needs. So we are a proud thought leader in the Cherwell community while offering a breadth of other services. So these services include these listed below: process design, implementation, automation, maturity assessment, strategy and road mapping, ongoing consulting, staff augmentation, training, integrations, self-service portal design, BRM solutions, analytics and dashboards, and customized solutions. We have long-term strategic partners to help you achieve your business needs. So some of these listed below: Cherwell, Bomgar, CG4 Asset Tracking, Comaround, Device42, Firescope, Celertis, Talent, and our newest partner, Fixstream. We have 2 headquarters, one in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, and then one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then if you have any additional questions, you can just email info@excaliburdata.com. So next, with our Cherwell product update and the moderator for the rest of the webinar, I'd like to introduce Robert Goguen, President of Excalibur Data Systems Canada. So thank you, Rob.
Hello, everyone. Tab, I don't think you're sharing the PowerPoint. It's not on the screen. We can't see it. So there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Well, we're pretty excited to offer this series for sure around Service Catalog. It's definitely something that everybody has expressed interest in. It's always something that everyone struggles with, and we thought we would take the opportunity over the next couple of webinars to address Service Catalog in particular, and to bring attention to some use cases. And in this case, Nick was our speaker today. Our guest speaker is definitely in a position to talk about their use case and their story, and it's really interesting to see their evolution. So before we get going, I would like to bring the attention to last time we spoke in the webinar, we talked about the 9.53 release and the upcoming 9.6. Well, now that 9.6 is out, actually 9.61 is out currently, and I wanted to bring the attention that you can find all of the release notes and all of the fixes for 9.6 are listed on the product help site. As you can see there, this has been a substantial release for Cherwell. There are over 196 items listed in the release notes as enhancements and or updates to the environment, and that is probably the greatest number of fixes / enhancements to date with a product release. And so instead of listing them all here, we thought we would just make sure that, hey, if you want to see a list of everything that was fixed in 9.6, feel free to go to the release notes. You can find that under the home, under the 9.6 upgrade information, under release notes, and you'll see the entire fix list there. In addition to that, 9.61 release 4 fixes, they're listed here. You can also find those in the release notes on the website. Now, as for the new features, you can also, if any of you have not had an opportunity yet, you can go to the product website at help.cherwell.com, and you can see a list of all the new features that are released within 9.6. And of course, with 9.6, we have had a significant product update with regards to content, new screens, new look and feel, et cetera, et cetera. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, please fly over to the help.cherwell.com and take a look at all the modifications. One of the things that Cherwell has done, which they haven't done in the past, is I've actually put a section on the site for known issues within the current version. This is a welcome change in that you'll be able to go in there and see if there are any particular known issues that are listed. You can also find that within inside the product website as well, under the known issues section. Click that link, it'll take you to the internal knowledge base, or the support knowledge base at support.cherwell.com, and it will give you a list of all the knowledge documents out there that are related to the current known issues for 9.6. So let's talk a little bit about our presenter today. Nick currently serves as the senior engineer supporting the Cherwell platform at Indiana University Health in Indianapolis. Previous to his position there, Nick served as IT services manager leading the help desk, executive support, IT asset management, as well as the GIS divisions for Louisville Metro Government in Louisville, Kentucky. Prior to that, Nick was a technology services director at Middle Georgia Regional Commission, serving the local governments there in Central Georgia, primarily in the areas of, again, GIS and web development and technology consulting. And Nick has about half a decade, about 4 or 5 years of experience developing professionally inside the Cherwell platform, so he certainly has a strong background in Cherwell development. So I'd like to allow Nick here to take the floor and maybe give us a little bit more of a background on what we're talking about today.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. It's my pleasure to be with everyone today, and appreciate the introduction. I've been working with the Cherwell tool for a while, and when I was first introduced to service management, our organization was migrating from a very simplistic ticketing tool to a robust enterprise service management platform, Cherwell. And as we undertook that initiative, it presented us with an opportunity to introduce self-service for the first time and rethink about how we construct a service catalog, not just for our internal use, but also how it's presented to our customers. The old system that we were replacing had over 1,200 unique ticket classifications, and we did our best to translate that to a new customer-facing service catalog. In that organization, we went live that September, and by the following February, we realized how terrible our catalog was and all the mistakes that we had made in designing it from scratch, and we began our first overhaul. Later that year, we redesigned parts of our service catalog again to address the deficiencies that were clarified through use. Now here at IU Health, on last November 3rd, we went live and introduced a new service catalog that included a customer-facing service catalog in this organization for the first time. Down from over 4,000 unique listings, our new catalog still included over 1,800 unique classifications, and it was immediately clear how problematic our catalog design was. Our customers found it difficult to navigate, and the technicians couldn't get through it either. By the 7th, 4 days after we released that platform, our executive director was already calling for a redesign of our service catalog. My team here is charged with leading the initiative to change how our organization approaches service catalog design. We're guided by best practices and the discussions with leading experts like Rob and the team at Excalibur, as well as Steve Castellano and other Cherwell users that have gone through this initiative before us, and trying to guide us in how we approach the improved usability and customer satisfaction that a service catalog can bring us. So in today's session, I hope to share some of the lessons that we've learned over that time and those failed approaches, and how we leverage the Cherwell platform in designing a service catalog that supports our organization's missions and goals. We hope that the information we share today will be valuable on your service catalog journey on how you approach it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience, which is mostly from redesigning an existing catalog, but some of the concepts here would be the same approaches that we would discuss in thinking about a catalog from scratch. I wanted to go ahead and share a little brief thing. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Tabitha or Rob, if you could pass the presenter to me, I'd like to show my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
You can see it.
So what is it that you see? All right.
The 7 steps.
7 steps.
Okay. So we might get to that, but I wanted to show this other screen here for the IT service catalog problem. So our problem here is that our service catalog is so vast and has so many individual listings that our customers and our technicians basically can't use it. They find it difficult to navigate, and it's not providing the value that we think we should be presenting to our customers. And it makes us think about, well, how do we construct a service catalog? How do we think about our services, and how do we think about, how to break those down into something that's consumable by our customers? And that's at the heart of what our discussion is going to be today. And we're going to help you go through some of the thought processes and sort of leading thoughts around what is the approach and how does that lead to the construction of a catalog. And later on in our subsequent sessions, I think we're going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of that. I think today's is more about the approach to building a catalog. Our approach then led to our investigation of our problem statement. And we went through a 5 whys, if you're familiar with that methodology. So our problem statement is that our catalog is difficult to navigate from customers and technicians. Why is that? Well, too many listings to choose from. How do we navigate through so many individual listings? And there are so many listings for us because that they, over time, we had listed named applications in our service catalog. And we thought that was necessary because it facilitated the assignments to unique teams that supported those systems and applications. And we thought that was appropriate because Cherwell is configured out of the box to do that. But it doesn't have to be so. And if we rethink about some of the capabilities that we have and how we construct a service catalog and then adapt the tool to meet those objectives, we can achieve a much more streamlined service catalog design. And this is the approach that we're taking here. And we think this has value in other organizations and their approach, and discussions with other groups and folks that have asked my opinion in the past. We always seem to want to start from the place of, well, I got to name my applications in my service catalog, otherwise how do I get it to the right place? And I'm here to tell you that there's other ways to get that done. So I want to open it up to Rob to help guide me so I don't just continue to ramble on here. But this is at the heart of what we want to discuss today, and hopefully you'll find some value in our journey.
Yeah, and I think one of the underlying things that people talk about or bring up is, like what defines a service, right? Like how do you articulate what a service is? And I think that's one of the struggling points. Most people have a situation where they have a service catalog, but it doesn't work for them, and they don't really know where to get going on it. There are some customers out there, there are organizations out there that don't use a service catalog, and they don't know where to get started on it. And when we start to look at the service catalog, there's a lot of questions come into play, like how many tiers should I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What should be included? And like some of the early generation service catalogs, you'll see like people listing off, applications as a service, and underneath it, in the category space, they list off every application that they have inside the organization. Why is that not a good way to go, or why is that a good way to go? What's the right approach? So I think it comes back to starting to talk about defining what that service looks like. So Nick, inside your organization, how did you guys go about determining what is a service and what is not a service, and what should belong as part of a larger service?
Well, I'll preface the answer by saying that the organizations that I've been involved in are principally internal support organizations, IT support organizations. We didn't serve an external customer base. And there may be different approaches when you have an external customer base. I'll talk more about my experience though. So the folks that you want to ask about the services are principally your organizational leadership and your customers. And you want to not pay too much attention to what comes in between. I think at those in-between levels, they sometimes lose the forest for the trees. So your organizational leadership, especially let's say your IT leadership, constructs the organization in a way to support the services it provides. So often your organizational hierarchy is a reflection of that, but you want to understand what services they understand that they lead and provide. And you can validate that pretty strongly by asking your customers, what is it that IT does for you? When you need something from IT, what is that thing that you need? And that gives you some clarity in terms of what your services are. And you have the traditional services. We support IT hardware equipment, let's say, computing devices and mobile devices and printing devices. Pretty straightforward. We support software applications that might run on those applications. Okay, pretty straightforward. But beyond that, you can get into some unique areas. So we have in our organization here today, healthcare specific services that we support. And that may not be present in all organizations. But generally speaking, you can think about it in broad strokes, all of the things that you're in a position to support your customers with. So that's how we've approached it in the past, and we feel that it's constantly evolving. As you understand the things that your customers rely on you for, that's how those items translate into your service catalog, into big, broad service areas.
And a lot of organizations would add and ask the question, we often get the, why do I need a service catalog? How does it help my organization? How would you respond to people who currently don't use a service catalog, but would definitely benefit from that? How would you articulate the value of living in a world with a service catalog?
So from my perspective, the service catalog serves a couple of functions. First, it's to organize your work in ways, but I think principally the value question has to do with how the analysis contributes to your continuous improvement initiative. So you have to understand what people are requesting and break that down into groupings that mean something operationally, and understand how well you're performing in those areas, and adjust if you're not performing up to the objective measures that you've set for yourself. So by breaking up the things that people request of you into the service catalog structure, you can then sort of slice and dice it up into chunks of performance metrics against certain services or classifications of service. So in the organization that I came from, we had a lot of problems with device management requests, sort of asset management and hardware support requests. And we would look at that particular service and all the teams that support it. And within that service, we see, we have a lot of requests for computer-based hardware support, but a lot of requests against mobile device-based support. And we found that within the hardware support service that we had established for ourselves, the outlier from a performance standpoint was the mobile device support area. We found that it was understaffed, and we didn't have good standards of practice in place. We didn't have, appropriate guidance documents, knowledge information to help our technicians support that service adequately. So it brought clarity to an area of need within our operational, our operational support. So I think that in my experience, the value of the service catalog comes from the analysis and the sort of, the categorization of the work that you do for the purposes of analysis in support of your continuous improvement initiative.
So in your experience, looking at what are the outcomes or what are the analytics that we want to derive from our digestion of requests and incidents, a lot of that service classification is directly linked to the output of analytics and being able to drive continual service improvement. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And that you can think about that as kind of a guiding principle in the approach to this overall service catalog design is, if we were to analyze this data, what conclusions might we draw from it? What should we be looking for? Very specific catalog listings and a boatload of categories and services may be too much to analyze, may be difficult to sort of break that down into consumable bits of actionable intelligence that your organizational leadership can digest.
And that could also be driven too in organizations who have external customer base, because you may have agreements with those customers that you're providing services to that a certain level of reporting is expected on how many of these did we get or how many of those did we get, and that can certainly drive the construct of the service catalog from that perspective due to the requirements of the reporting of the end customer that may be external to your organization, or you have a contract in place to provide a certain type of reporting, and that could also drive the crafting of the service catalog itself. Now, within your organization, Nick, you've gone through several iterations now of your service catalog. And do you guys use a 3-tier service catalog, a 4-tier service catalog? What are some of the things that you guys have learned from going from 4,000 elements to 1,800 elements and now going through another iteration to try to reduce that amount? What are some of the things that you guys have learned from your mistakes, I guess if you want to call them mistakes, or areas of opportunity from your previous iterations that you're going to take into this project to help further develop out the maturity level?
Well, I think that my experience, and maybe I'm biased because I, spent a lot of time in the asset management space, is that relying on the service catalog in terms of the classification of requests to include named applications is a real mistake, and it just leads to it leads to a service catalog that just is constantly in flux, especially in a large organization that's constantly bringing in and retiring out named applications and systems. You're constantly, from a support standpoint, adding new classifications and routings and all that stuff, and it just becomes a high volume of requests. But it doesn't, ultimately, it doesn't fundamentally change the services we provide. All we're changing is the assets that have been activated in our production environment. And I think the lesson learned for me in going through this a couple of times is to leverage your asset management capabilities. So Cherwell is a great has a great tie-in between the two, because we have this great CMDB that allows you to manage assets in and out of the organization. But a lot of people don't tie the two together, tie the asset to the classification scheme to allow that specified asset to provide some of the specificity that is needed. So in the organization, this organization that I'm in now, in the past, we had a 4-tier classification scheme: service, system or application, request, and then I forget what the other one was. It was before I got here. But naming the application allowed that to provide the specificity. What we have now is 3 tiers: service category, subcategory, but we're moving towards a classification that utilizes the same 3-tier structure, service category, subcategory, that facilitates the analysis and sort of a small a customer-facing approach, but providing specificity by associating a named application. So the CI-based approach. So let's say, for example, we as a service providing entity provide software support to our users, right? And that software may be business applications or clinical applications. And we might ask the customer to, report issues. Their catalog listing might be to report an issue with their clinical software. Well, we should know what applications or systems are active in our environment to support clinical applications or clinical support. So we can present the customer with a list of active clinical applications. Say, you've said you're reporting an issue with your clinical software. Which of these listings are you having a problem with? So we can utilize our asset management system to provide effectively a de facto fourth level to our classification scheme. But ultimately, the taxonomy and classification is really just clinical software support, reporting an issue.
So in a sense, your configuration management database, or the CIs, become in effect that dynamic fourth classification tier, which allows, when you're performing your analytics, the service level is the high level, the general service area that it's the incident or service request is being submitted for. Your categorization level is a subcomponent of that service. So the larger the services may be broken into finer components, and it may be in alignment with the application support management of that service. So you may have several groups within that service that support that space. And then, of course, your subcategory becomes a specific actionable item, like you're submitting a request, or you're requesting something, or whatever that might be unique within that application space that you need to not only report on, but also make a request of. But then, to further that, your CMDB becomes a more specific, more focused area of classification in itself, where you're pinpointing the specific area within that subset of service that you're actually submitting the request or reporting the issue against. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And so one of the things that we've learned through experience is that Cherwell does not necessarily come out of the box with that capabilities, but it's a very easy leap to engage that type of dynamic, let's say, classification, dynamic selection of a CI to support your routing, your assignment, or to support your specific forms. So this is one of the things that Steve, who wasn't able to be with us today, taught me years ago in one of my first sort of Cherwell Global Conference sessions that I went to, how to leverage your asset management database, which is designed around the lifecycle management of assets, the planned introduction of an asset and the planned retirement of an asset when it's out. Your service catalog doesn't have the same type of lifecycle management associated with it within the Cherwell platform. It's not really designed to be something that is dynamically changing as the tools come and go out of the organization. So by utilizing your asset management in conjunction with your classification, your CMDB in conjunction with your classification, you're really leveraging the best of both worlds. I always say, ultimately, what we are asked to do to support our customers doesn't change a whole lot. I think in most organizations it's going to be pretty static, but the tools that we use to support those services are constantly changing. I always joke here, we're a Microsoft, Outlook shop, Exchange, Office 365, but tomorrow the organization could decide that they want to do Lotus Notes instead. So we've got like 60 routings in our classification, all associated with Outlook and Exchange. Am I going to change all of that just because the tool that we're using to support email is different? Ultimately, our customers don't care what we use. They care that they have email and an ability to communicate and collaborate with their peers. That level of service and the expectations around that service are unchanged. But the tools can change, and they can change quickly. And the CMDB is designed to manage that. The service catalog is not.
Right. So, so from that perspective, if a organization were to get started and they have no service catalog, or they want to scrap their current service catalog, what would you say, from your experience, are the first steps that you would take? What are the steps, and what's that life cycle of evolvement look like? Having been through it a few times now, what would be the advice that you would give to organizations who are getting started along that path, where they want to either build a service catalog where one did not exist, or they want to basically start over and move forward? What would be that approach that you would recommend to other customers, having gone through it as a customer yourself more than once?
I think that in some ways the most important thing to do is to put something out there. A straw man that's going to take the heat, but it's going to build you some data that you can begin to work from. But also, make sure that you're speaking to your customers. We, in iterations of service catalog redesigns that I've done, we developed customer focus groups, folks that once we did have a service catalog, we knew who used it, and we polled them extensively and gave them advanced drafts and asked for their feedback on the different design iterations that we developed. If we're developing from scratch and starting something new, I'd continue to put something out there based on an understanding of what we feel our services are, and then again engage those same customer focus groups to say, do you understand the services that we think we provide? Is this matched with what you understand our services to be? And they could say no. They could say, well, what about this thing that I ask for all the time? Where would I go to get that? How is that reflected here in what you've proposed? So the customers are going to be the very best source of validation for you in terms of how you build a catalog. But I think you can start with your organizational leadership and what they have positioned your support organization to do.
So getting into that, talking about the customer experience and talking about that, what about the language, the wording? Now, you had said in your experience that you've dealt with internal customers and not necessarily external facing. Have you experienced challenges from your customer on, you have the service catalog, but I still don't know how to classify, or I'm still having trouble with it? What about the vernacular used when positioning the services, the categories, subcategories, and how they're presented to the customer?
Yeah, so I think that from a customer, in a customer-facing catalog standpoint, we always use the customer's language in terms of when it's presented to the customer. Now, that may translate into more tech language as a ticket comes in sort of behind the wall or behind the scenes. But I always try to think about, what does the customer say? When they say email. Cherwell as a platform provides us with a lot of opportunities to alias things and to include additional keywords that help the customers navigate a service catalog. But we have always had approaches when internal teams develop classifications to include acronyms and formal names and things that don't mean anything to the customer. And those are just not helpful when we go to expose it to the customer and say, hey, navigate this catalog and pick the thing that you want. When they don't care that it's Outlook, they don't care that it's Lotus Notes, they know it's their email, right? So use that language. I'm having an issue with my email. Do I care that it's Exchange or Exchange Online or Office 365? Absolutely not. I care that my email's not working, right? And you can say right in there, my email's not working. Maybe that's a classification of ticket. Perfectly valid if that's what's, if that's what the customer understands.
Right, and so it's really important when you're defining your service and the aspects of that service to include descriptors. It's really important to have kind of removed the ambiguity that may exist when it comes to classifications, when it comes to each of the levels, so that when a customer is engaging, if especially through, say, a self-service portal situation, if they're not sure what it means, there's at least descriptors, there's items in there where your services are well defined, in that you know definitively, yes, I'm picking the right thing because I read the description and I understand what it means.
Yes, and your service catalog, as you build out your service catalog, and starting at that service listing and then breaking it down, it should, in my experience, it should represent just a comprehensive listing of everything that your customers can ask of you. So it should not have any gaps, and it should not have any overlaps. It should be a seamless sort of quilt of coverage for your customers. And as we have utilized a service catalog, and what leads to service catalog sort of redevelopment or additions or changes to your service catalog, you find that there are gaps that need to be filled. A customer asked for this thing, and it doesn't really fit into one of the listings that we have. Or perhaps a customer says, I want to choose this, but I see these two listings, and I think it could be either one. And when those situations arise, you have to fill those gaps or provide clarity or separation between two like items, so that you're clarifying points of confusion and you're filling gaps of selection. And that ensures a comprehensive listing as you go. So we constantly found areas where we had gaps, especially right after we introduced a new service catalog. The customer is going to find something to ask for that's not going to be in there. But as you think about how that request should be added, it should conform to some general guidelines around what's there. Or maybe it was there, it just wasn't where the customer was looking for it. And we have to think about how does that particular listing, or how that customer's ask leads them to that listing that they ended up not finding. So keywords, descriptions, improving descriptions, search terms, those are all strategies that we can use to improve that navigation. It may not be that the listing itself wasn't there. It may be that the customer couldn't find it, which is in some ways, kind of the same problem. It's effectively the same problem. We have to provide not only a comprehensive listing of things our customers can ask for, and that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be specific. They can be generalized, but it has to be seamless. It has to be a complete coverage.
So we see this all the time with our customers when they're building out service catalogs and the struggles that they go through. A lot of times they're thinking service category, subcategory, but a lot of customers we've noticed don't take the time to actually perform full service definition, where what items are included in the service, what items are excluded in the service, what's the description of these services, what's the description of the categories, and so forth, which could very well alleviate some of those troubles going forward when it comes to customers trying to find and search through a service catalog to find what they're looking for. And it's one thing to be logically named, it's another thing to ensure that you have full service definition in order to help that customer get to where they want to be. But it's not just the customer. The technician side also suffers from this, where, do I put it under this or do I put it under that? I'm not 100% sure. So by ensuring that you have proper service definition, it takes away that ambiguity when it comes to making sure that the right object or the right service classification is selected for a particular incident or service request.
That's right. And if the technicians and the customers can't put it into the right classification where it just necessarily is this thing, and it could fall anywhere and they're just picking whatever arbitrarily, that really does not help you in the analysis that we spoke about at the beginning about where do you derive the value. So you're trying to identify trends in performance, performance areas of improvement, and your classification is really designed around quickly identifying and supporting that, making those things jump out at you when you have a problem in a particular service support area. So if you're not able to put it in the right place because there's ambiguity or lack of clarity in your service catalog, you're going to be less able to respond to or to identify and then respond to issues of performance management.
Right. And when you start to look at a service catalog, it serves much more of a purpose than just being how many tickets do I have of a certain type, right? Service catalog also plays a big factor in routing, ticket routing, who gets the ticket assigned to it, who's responsible for a particular area, and also ties into both SLAs, response and resolution times and stuff like that. So it plays a much bigger role than just what type of ticket are we getting. It also plays into who's responsible for supporting this particular area of the service and this particular type of request. Now, at your organization, do you have tiered support? Do you do level 1, level 2, level 3? And is that also help driven by the service catalog?
So I'll say that in some ways that we do have some tiered support, but it's not as structured as we would like it. So our future iteration is going to be able to, or we're hoping we're going to tie that in a lot more closely and take a much more deliberate approach to service lifecycle management and understanding what you mentioned around, doing a much more comprehensive job of creating the service itself and understanding what that is and what that isn't and setting expectations around it. But we do list, team defaults for particular classifications and escalation pathways, but we don't have a lot of structure in our organization right now around using a standard escalation pathway for a particular type of support. We want to move that way though.
So how did your organization get to have 4,000 items in their service catalog to begin with? What was your approach there? Was it a case of people just adding things that they thought were not there? And how is that going to change in the future? Are you going to have a prescribed process now? So driving service through process to ensure that you don't run into the same situation.
So the way that developed, and I wasn't around for the full evolution of all of that in these organizations that I've been involved in. I've been coming into, at the place where we're correcting all of that stuff. But I'll say that I think it came about because there was no central authority around how do we construct a service catalog. There was no guidelines. So what we had was individual groups and teams saying, I need a listing for, this particular item. The one I always used to joke around is there was a classification that was request new ADOU. So Active Directory Organizational Unit. Now, how in the world anybody would even think to ask that's not actually constructing a security solution, I don't know. But why that has to be so specific, and to me it strikes me as very specific and very sort of esoteric and designed around one team's individual workflow. I think it was some of that stuff developed over time to satisfy individual teams' work and to identify specific types of work, focused on what the team wants to see in a breakdown of their work items. It wasn't focused on, I think, from my perspective, on the customer and what our organization designs our support services around providing. So it became something that ballooned, where precedent was set to have these very specific, very unique sort of requests that can be made, and then it just kind of built on itself, and nobody was in a position of authority to say, no, stop doing this. Like, we need to change it. We need to stop that. That's not a good practice. So we've had not really a strict adherence to, let's say, a customer focus, because like I said, there was never any customer-facing component of a service catalog before the end of last year in this organization.
Right. And so customer-facing service catalogs certainly would change the landscape on how that information is presented, and also identify the areas of opportunity quite quickly, I would assume, when you do expose that to the customer.
Yeah, and to answer the other part of your question, how does it change going forward? So when we think about classification right now, our technicians and intake specialists are accustomed to typing in a search term that's very, very specific to define a unique classification that matches exactly that thing. And going forward, the ask for them is going to be to think more generally about what the customer is facing. So if the customer is describing, some problem with their email, right, from a classification standpoint, it's sufficient to say it's an email issue, and that's enough. And beyond that, we're saying it's either their local Outlook client, their device, or perhaps their Exchange account. And then going forward from there, once you get the right classification and the right CI, then you're going to be presented with a specific form, which Cherwell does very well, to guide the technician or the client through a set of questions designed to further clarify the issue that they're having. And so we're going to ask the tech intake specialist to classify generically and then walk them through the investigative steps that we determine to be necessary to investigate the issue.
Right. And so I notice up here on your screen you're sharing the 7 steps of creating creating an effective ITSM service catalog. This is a standard that was released by Cherwell a number of years ago. Did you want to dive into a little bit about the steps that are listed here and how they may run in parallel to the efforts that you guys are doing inside your own organization?
So this is a really good guide to the same sort of roadmap that we're approaching. So we sort of can all agree on why a service catalog is crucial, but if you can't find that agreement in your organization, then you're starting off on a hard road. So you got to get there first. And then we're along this journey at various stages and various points, and then we're starting this journey over again. Right now, we're now establishing a team with authority to create a service catalog and to manage it, right? And then trying to understand, like what we've talked about, what is it that our organization is designed to provide to our customers? And that's, I think, this step 2. And step 3, as you move through step 3, here talking in customer terms, in business terms, what do your customers say? Avoiding the techie talk. So, I think that, I've only come across this recently. I wish I had this back in the day when I was designing these service catalogs. But the principles that are described here can be fairly intuitive, I think, in my experience, if you're keeping the focus on the customers and taking a customer service-oriented approach to how you construct your service catalog design. But this is a great sort of reference guide to all of the things that we would do and all the things that we're looking to do in our organization. Understanding how a service is supported, what level of support are there, how does that translate to the customer, and building a catalog, and maybe you create also a technical version, and then utilizing a process to review and update that. What's missing? Like I said, what are those gaps? What are those overlaps that need to be clarified? And I don't like the fact that it ends, because I think you're going to feed this into a continuous improvement and analysis process that allows you to begin again and think about, maybe there's a particular listing that's problematic or service is problematic, or maybe you bring on a new service, right? It's possible that you bring on a new service. I say it doesn't change often, but a new service line in an organization is probably a big deal, and you should go through the same sort of roadmap to define how that is represented in your service catalog.
For all those who are attending the webinar today, Tabitha is going to send up a follow-up email out to everybody post-webinar, and we're going to include the 7 steps that you see here for everybody to review and to have in their toolbox for when they are taking on a ITSM service catalog project inside their own organization to kind of give them the guidelines of things to think about, steps to do, and how to get to where they want to be. And included in that, we're also going to send out an example service definition document, which will help you look at the items on how to define that service catalog and the things that you should be thinking about when defining those services. So everybody who attended the webinar today will get a copy of those in a follow-up email that Tabitha will be sending out in a post-webinar. So we're coming down to the last 8 minutes or so of the session. Do we have any questions from anybody who's in attendance today that may have questions for Nick about his journey, or may want to share anything about their current journey and where they're at and where they're looking at trying to get started, or where they might be in the process of improving their own service catalog? Tough crowd.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and say one of the things that we're particularly focused on here at the outset of our journey is talked about down here at the beginning around buy-in by the organization, achieve buy-in from senior staff and service delivery teams. So we're going to be asking our service teams that if we can create and execute on the vision that we have for our service catalog design here, we're going to be asking our teams to, especially our intake specialists, to change an approach that has been entrenched over a decade of service catalog use. And that's going to be a big ask. So, but what we're going to be trying to focus on in achieving that buy-in is to let them know that we're not trying to take away the specificity that they have grown to understand or to derive from the service catalog. We're just trying to achieve it in a different way by tying in the asset management component of it. But ultimately, I've talked with our leadership about this, like I've got this grand vision for what a service catalog design is and should be and what the best practices are. But ultimately, if our users revolt against the changes that we want to make, this goes nowhere. So this effort early on around, understanding the concept of what we're trying to achieve and demonstrating what that means for the individual technician, especially the service desk intake group, is vitally important to the success of our overall initiative, no matter what we do with our customer-facing portal. I look forward to any other questions that might be happening here.
Okay, we did have a question that came in. How long did it take for you to revamp your service catalog, and what's your expectation on the next iteration in terms of a timeline or a time frame?
So the first iteration that we did in my first effort here, we kicked off really formally in February, I think, of 2017, and we implemented our first redesign in June. So what we did during that time frame was designed a new catalog, built it in test, derived customer focus groups, did a lot of surveys of those customer groups, let them try it out, surveyed them, revamped it, and then advertised it going forward, advertised it in a lead up to introduction of the new catalog. So all told about 5 months. The organization here at IU Health, we're planning on about a 5-month initiative here that's following the same type of guidelines. We're going to be introducing some capabilities in terms of configuration, and then asking teams to rethink about how their existing catalog listings may change with that additional capabilities and configuration, and then resetting that out for our customers through focus groups and gathering feedback from our customers to validate what we think is an appropriate approach.
All right, perfect. All right. So if there are no more questions, like I said, we will be sending out a post email to everybody with some information. The 7 steps of the service catalog is going to be included in that. And in our next iteration of the webinar, we're going to be talking about, fair enough, we have a service catalog. Let's talk about how do we evolve it? How do we drop services off? How do we bring new services on? What if I want to make a modification to my categories? What's the best approach to that? What's the best approach to shifting as my business shifts? How do I evolve my service catalog once it's in place? And that'll be the focus of the next session. I also wanted to point out to everybody, Nick will be attending the CLEAR conference here in Nashville, and Nick has been selected as a speaker, so I just want to give Nick a little bit of a props here on, he will be speaking at the global conference in Nashville, CLEAR conference, and his speaking session is going to be a bit more of a deep dive specifically into the service catalog space, and specifically to their project as it relates to their service catalog, getting into more specifics. So I really want to thank Nick today for coming in and sharing his experience and answering some questions and giving us you know, his insight into how his organization is dealing with the evolution of their service catalog. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today for taking the time to listen to Nick and expressing interest within our webinar series around the service catalog. And we really hope to see you at the next webinar as it relates to the evolution of a service catalog and how to bring it forward once you have established something and putting it in place. Again, thank you very much, Nick, for taking the time today to share your experience with everybody. It's very, very appreciated.
Thank you, Rob and Tabitha and everybody in attendance. I'm always happy to share our experience. I don't claim to be an expert, but you know, I do hope that our experience and the journey that I've gone through in sharing that provides some value to help somebody along on their journey. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk about it and share what I've been able to learn and gather from other sources and other folks like our other presenter who wasn't able to make it today, Steve. A lot of what I have done in terms of service catalog design has been guided by Steve and some of the stuff that Steve's done. And I'm sure Steve has his inspiration elsewhere. So if I can inspire somebody's journey and help them along, I'm really happy to be in that position and help however I can.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and we hope to see you all at the next session on service catalogs.
Thank you.